So, welcome everybody to this online launch of the Agroforestry Network brief on agroforestry and youth. We are very happy to see so many participants here today. We hope that you have prepared a nice lunch to enjoy while listening and that you will find our program interesting. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Eva Åberg to hold the welcoming address. Eva is the chairperson of Agroforestry Network and also the director of the Agroforestry. Please go ahead, Eva.
Thank you, Matilda. I really want to welcome you all to today's launch of the policy brief Agroforestry and Youth, Potential and Barriers, produced by Agroforestry and Agroforestry Network and CIANI. Agroforestry Network is a platform for international agroforestry practices based in Sweden and initiated by the Agroforestry to promote the use of agroforestry in developing countries, to make agroforestry more recognized among development aid stakeholders, but also other stakeholders, and to share knowledge with other agroforestry experts. The world is facing great challenges at the moment. Climate change is a real threat that already had a huge negative impact on the most vulnerable people in the world, leaving hundreds of millions without secure livelihoods. And only by working together with sustainable solutions, we can change the course of events towards a better future. Agroforestry methods can assist when fulfilling all these goals. The method of planting trees and crops together is an efficient and effective way to fight poverty as yields increases, mitigate climate change as trees store CO2, and fight desertification and restore degraded land. And as a way to fulfill the above-mentioned goals of the network, the Agroforestry Network has published a large number of policy briefs, each focusing on a pressing issue in relation to agroforestry. Examples are agroforestry and biodiversity, agroforestry and migration, agroforestry and value chain and markets, and so on. And in the end of the webinar, you'll find a link to these briefs in the chat. But now under this, during this lunch webinar, Agroforestry Network launches the policy brief Agroforestry and Youth, Possibilities and Barriers, showcasing the role of agroforestry for young farmers' livelihoods in sub-Saharan African countries. The brief outlines concrete recommendations for policymakers on how to use agroforestry in an inclusive manner to create new opportunities for youth in food systems. You will also access the brief and it will be linked to in the end of this webinar. And you can also find it on Agroforestry Network's webpage. We will today listen to the authors of the brief, hear comments from the SIDA representative Anna Axelsson, and also hear from researchers, NGOs, and from the main actors, the youth, farmers, and their organizations. Please ask your questions in the chat and we will do our best to forward them to our participants. And again, very welcome and please enjoy this launch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva. I would now like to introduce her to our keynote speaker, Anna Axelsson. She's a senior policy specialist for environment and climate at the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA. And she's also the coordinator for the Stockholm +50, the UN conference taking place in June in Stockholm. Youth is a leading theme in many global discussions today, and we are very happy that Anna is here with us today and can tell us a little bit of the work she's doing in relation to that topic. So please, Anna, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Matilda. I'm very happy to be here today, of course. And firstly, on behalf of SIDA, I would very much like to thank the Agroforestry Network for preparing this very interesting brief. I really find the brief, with its focus on both youth and agroforestry, to be very timely. as we find ourselves in volatile and changing times. I think that young people of today will perhaps live their adult lives in a world which may look different from the world that we have known over the past many decades. And there is potential in the different crises that we find ourselves in, and there is potential for transformation, but there is also a lot of uncertainty. We don't know yet how the economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, will shape up. Will it be inclusive and green, as we hope and strive for? Or will it further increase inequalities and continue business as usual? There is, again, great potential in the recovery for green jobs, for improved social security systems, and for building climate resilience, but we are yet to see it materialize. What we do know, like Eva has already pointed out, is that the impacts of climate change will increase in the coming decades. And we know, like the IPCC stated only last week, that adaptation efforts are not on par at all with the impacts that are already happening, and especially not with what is to be expected. We also know that we're losing biodiversity at a speed that we've never seen before in modern times, and doing so, we're undermining the foundation of our societies, our health, and our livelihoods. We also know that 23% of the world's population live in fragile or conflict contexts. As many as 76% of people living in extreme poverty actually live in fragile contexts. And the stress and the trauma of ongoing or threatening conflict may hold young people back, among many other things, of course, from making investments in the future. Also, just under half of the world's population live in some form of democracies, and less than 5% live in fully functioning democracies. And that limits, of course, the rest, these people's opportunity to influence how policies shape their lives. There's also an ongoing backlash going on with regards to the rights of women and girls, which limit their ability to become economic actors in their own right and being able to make decisions about their future. So in these uncertain times, resilience building must be fair and inclusive and gender equal, if we are to harness the potential that lies in this crisis. And agroforestry, which we're discussing today, touches, I think, on several aspects of the uncertainties that we all face, especially young people. And it can be part of the solution to many of the aspects of the different crises that we face. I think agroforestry can help create jobs, contribute to sustainable economic development, to restoring biodiversity, to building climate resilience and mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, improving livelihoods, and also empowering women to be an active part of local economies and politics. So in these uncertain times, the UN is convening a global conference on sustainability called A Healthy Planet for the Prosperity of All, Our Responsibility, Our Opportunity. And in commemoration of the first global conference on environment and development, which was held here in Stockholm in 1972, this conference is, as you know, known as Stockholm Plus 50. And it will, as you're all aware, I'm sure, be held in Stockholm on the 2nd and 3rd of June this year. And this is an opportunity to explore, I think, the opportunities that lie in the converging crises. The Stockholm Plus 50 conference aims to bridge a couple of different divides. It aims to bridge the divide between issues that are usually discussed and treated in silos, even though they are closely connected, like climate change and biodiversity, and like environmental issues and sustainable economic development. It also aims to bridge the divide between commitments already made under frameworks like the Paris Agreement and Agenda 2030 and the reality where we find ourselves today. It's in that sense, it wants to close the implementation gap between where we are at and the commitments made. And in doing so, it needs to identify the action needed to close that gap and ensure that there's commitment to that action. And I think a key discussion at the conference will also be how we achieve a just, inclusive and sustainable recovery after the COVID-19 pandemic. And in that, I think youth and agroforestry both have an important role to play in bridging the gap. So now one important aspect of the Stockholm +50 conference is to honor the legacy of the Stockholm 72 conference in terms of engaging civil society with a particular focus on youth. And the 72 conference was groundbreaking in terms of providing civil society a voice, both in the preparations and the execution of the meeting. So to follow up on that legacy, the Swedish government wants to make sure that the engagement of civil society with a specific focus on meaningful youth engagement is at the heart of Stockholm +50. So for that purpose, a youth task force has been established to serve sort of as a sounding board for the organizers of the conference, giving regular input to the planning of the event. And the youth task force now consists of around, I think it's 55 youth representatives from around the world. And I know that one of them, Elizabeth, is part of this seminar and will speak later. And they have all been nominated through a bottom-up process. And this group is preparing policy priorities and engaging and consulting youth through various events in many countries and regions, as I'm sure Elizabeth will share more about. And SIDA is currently looking at ways to strengthen the influence of youth in the preparations for the conference and the outcomes, of course, as well. We are looking at ways to be able to support the youth task force to reach out to youth in low and middle income countries to ensure that their voices are also heard and reflected in this process. And we are looking at the possibility of strengthening a regional youth platform in Asia as well. And as SIDA, we are, of course, keen to see that we can support structures for youth that can live on beyond the conference, because Stockholm +50 is one step on a longer journey towards sustainability and resilience, where the perspectives of many actors are needed. So I am interested to hear your ideas on how youth can be supported to take further part in the sustainability agenda, including agroforestry issues and in many different contexts. Then before I conclude, I would just like to share a reflection or maybe a question that I hope maybe we can continue to reflect on during the seminar. I know that we will hear today about a lot of practical experiences, both in terms of challenges and opportunities related to getting young people engaged in agriculture, particularly in agroforestry practices. In the spaces that I move mostly, I hear a lot of talk about how do we engage investors, how do we engage finance minister, heads of states, etc. in the discussion around Stockholm +50. This is important, of course, but I can't help but wonder, how do we bridge the gap once and for all between the realities that we're going to hear about today and this high-level policymaking? How do we bring the voices from today's seminar and the experiences and views presented into the high-level policy discussions at Stockholm +50 or the upcoming COP27 or COP15 on biodiversity in a meaningful way? So I'm keen to hear what are your views on how young people should be meaningfully involved in these conversations, or maybe if you think they should not. There could be other better ways of influencing the conditions for young people to, for example, take up agroforestry practices. So maybe we don't need to be in those spaces. Maybe we need to be somewhere else. But either way, I hope to walk away from the seminar knowing a little bit better, how to bridge the gap and to have a better view of the way forward from Stockholm +50. Because it's just, as I said, a step on the way. I look forward to the presentation of the brief and to follow the discussions with the panel members. And again, I would like to thank you for preparing the brief and organizing the seminar, and not least for inviting SIDA to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Excellent presentation, very informative and clear. And I will bring with me the question you asked to the panel discussion. So maybe we can start off with some practical experiences and so on, and then we'll finalize with the way forward and how we can move our experiences into the future. Thank you again. Now I would like to welcome Alice Carstensen and Jonathan Eng from Siani, the authors of the brief Agroforestry and Youth, Potential and Barriers. I would also like to mention Linda Hansson, who initiated the work of the brief and was in charge of the survey that the results are built upon. And Linda is not here today, unfortunately, but she is no less an author. So Alice and Jonathan, please go ahead with the presentation of the brief.
Hi everyone, and thank you for the opportunity for us to present this brief about agroforestry and youth in sub-Saharan African countries. My name is Alice Carstensen and I work for Siani, the Swedish International Agriculture Network Initiative, which is a global, open and inclusive network that supports and promotes multi-sector dialogue and action for sustainable food systems. And as Matilda said, this brief is co-authored by myself, by Jonathan Eng and Linda Hansson at the Gothenburg Center for Sustainable Development.
And my name is Jonathan, and I also worked for Siani when we wrote this brief. And the brief we're launching today is focusing on both the barriers and the possibilities for youth to practice agroforestry in sub-Saharan Africa. And whereas youth and food systems are now seen almost everywhere, there hasn't been a lot of research about agroforestry and youth. So this brief explores a fairly new topic with many opportunities for youth, and we hope that this could be the start of a good discussion. So the brief argues that agroforestry can contribute to improve the livelihoods of youth in sub-Saharan Africa. It can be used as an inclusive and sustainable approach to create new opportunities for youth in food systems. And youth play a central role in achieving sustainable development, and it's ultimately for their future that sustainable development is important. And we argue that food systems need to be equitable, they need to be profitable and attractive for youth to see work in food systems as an alternative. And for this to happen, there are, of course, a lot of structural challenges, but also norms that need to be tackled. And we believe that agroforestry can play an important role in this. We decided to link the brief early on to the discussions about food systems following the Food Systems Summit that took place last year. So the hope is that this could be a starting point for discussions on using agroforestry as one of these innovative and interesting tools that have been searched for in these discussions earlier, and that can create the sustainable opportunities for youth in food systems. And as there isn't a lot of research done on this topic since before, we also did a survey, as Matilda mentioned earlier, and that was meant to complement the literature review that we also did in the brief. And we sent it out through the Agroforestry Network and through a social media campaign that we launched by Siani. And 209 people answered from 21 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And most of them were based in Kenya, Uganda, and Nigeria, but other than that, we have a fairly good spread across the continent. We targeted people between 15 and 34 years old, and out of the people that replied, 65% of them indicated that they worked as farmers, and the rest worked in other parts of our food systems. And to complement our analysis, we also interviewed representatives based in different countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and this also helped us to then strengthen our findings in the survey, but also the different results that we found in the literature review. So based on our overall analysis, the survey indicates that youth have a big interest in agroforestry and sustainable agriculture, but there are some main obstacles to overcome for them to be able to engage. And there's a lack of knowledge around agroforestry, there's a lack of capital and sustained long-term access to land. But just to show this interest, we have a quote here from one of the respondents in the survey that when asked about the benefits of engaging agroforestry, the respondent said, you're able to feed yourself and your family with the nutrition that you need. You're also able, you're also able to be in business throughout the year according to what is in season for planting and harvesting, and you have endless options and opportunities.
So as Jonathan just presented, the survey asked about people's knowledge and general familiarity of agroforestry, and also touched upon the barriers to practice agroforestry and opportunities for improvements. And as you can see on this slide, one question was about the one main barrier to practice agroforestry. And as you can see, lack of resources stands out as the main issue. Almost 30% of the respondents to the survey said that access to financial capital was the main issue, followed by access to land and access to farming inputs. And as we also can see in the chart, knowledge about agroforestry, disconnections to markets, and lack of enabling policies were also perceived as barriers among the participants. Only 3% said that they didn't have enough time to invest in agroforestry. We also asked what the farmers themselves believe they need to start practicing agroforestry in their daily life. And for this question, the respondents could choose from multiple answers. And most of them believe that they need both financial and natural resources. That is more money to invest in farming, access to land, and better farming inputs, very much in line with what we saw in terms of barriers. And when we received the survey answers, we also noted that the barriers and the needs might be the same for many smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan African countries, and not only to youth in particular. However, we consider that youth are in a transitional phase away from childhood with added independence, agency, and responsibility of becoming adults and everything that that entails in life, and argue that these factors may actually place additional stress and added vulnerability to youth compared to older generations. For example, accessing land and capital may be harder for youth who haven't had as much time to get long-term land leases, find loans, or access savings. And we also note that accessing resources may vary within the youth group, across gender, class, ethnicity, and wealth, etc. In the survey, one interesting response particularly highlighted the issue of lack of land, but it at the same time provided ideas on how to address resource barriers to youth, saying that youth must be able to own land, and it can be achieved through partnerships and by putting the resources together. Access to funds through loans or startup capital for youth with promising futures might also be a good idea.
Yes, as I said before, the brief highlights opportunities that agroforestry can offer, but also show some of the obstacles experienced by youth. And based on our literature review, the survey, and the interviews, we're able to present 3 final conclusions that are also aimed at being some kind of life recommendations for policymakers to also consider moving forward. And the first conclusion is that agroforestry should be included in agricultural extension programs, and youth should be targeted as a key group of actors. And we try to raise the possibility of agroforestry and the spillover effects it can have on other parts of development. To get youth engaged in agroforestry, policymakers need to take an holistic approach, not only to agriculture, but also to rural development as a whole. And the issues are obstacles, they are interlinked, and they need to be understood as such. And we have now today several times raised the importance of knowledge, the access to capital, and access to land. And these are the 3 main barriers that are seen both in the earlier literature, but also in our survey. And land is also connected to the fact that agroforestry takes time, and that is also something for policymakers or other actors with financing to consider. Agroforestry is resilient, it is sustainable, but we need to invest to make it happen in the long term. And in this conclusion, we also give examples of how, for instance, IFAD or other NGOs can play a very important role to be able to build capacity, provide training and coaching on how to access financial services, or even provide bank loans where banks are unavailable to do so.
Our second conclusion is that for food systems to be equitable, profitable, and attractive to young farmers, programs, policies, and tools must acknowledge that everyone's needs are different, and that youth is not one group, but actually many. And as we mentioned before, the situation for young people in farming can differ a lot depending on many factors such as class, gender, culture, ethnicity, and location. And looking at the diverse youth group can show us the other aspects that are critical to young farmers' ability to practice agroforestry, apart from the agriculture approach in itself. And this can be things like balancing work and family, or dealing with the power relations between generations or genders. For example, some young farmers might need to balance practicing farming with going to school, or balance farming with taking care of young children. And young men and women may have different roles in the household, or may not have access to the same resources needed for them to start with agroforestry. And our last conclusion is much related to the question posed by Anna, that bottom-up inclusion is key, and that youth must be included in policy processes and decision-making at all stages. Young farmers themselves must be able to drive the issues in their sector that they find the most important and make this heard. And we actually saw this in the survey, and in the analysis of the survey, the young farmers asked for education, networking opportunities, and more contacts to be able to be more included. They also want to learn from older generations. And for this to take place, we could use already existing networks and farmer associations that I'm sure we will hear more about in the panel today, and promote targeted funding for youth in particular. We also believe that mentorship programs and networks that include youth could be used to spread knowledge and information about the opportunities of engaging in agroforestry, and be an open space for young people to discuss, learn from each other, and also as a way to tackle the social norms that might hinder the shift to agroforestry in the long term.
Yes, just some short words looking ahead. We hope that this brief will start a discussion and that can be used as a base for discussion and ongoing work. What we can say is that more research is definitely needed on the specific challenges for youth to be able to engage in agroforestry. We have looked at more of an overarching picture of engaging youth. But there's also now room to grasp momentum. We heard it before about Stockholm plus 50, and you can really see now that youth as a topic is really on top of the agenda. And there is probably room now to influence and incorporate agroforestry into these discussions as well. That was all for us. Happy to get in contact with us later on to answer any questions. Don't hesitate. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan and Alice. I have tried to look at the chat to see if we have any questions, but I haven't seen any yet. But if there are anything appearing, I will let you know and include you in the discussion again. So again, thank you so much for your presentation and also for your energy when it comes to producing this brief. I know it's been a bumpy ride. There's always a lot of work included when you do surveys and fieldworks and so on. But I think this brief provides a very special opportunity of hearing direct voices from farmers. You don't see that so much in research, as you have noticed when you try to do the literature review. So I think this brief will be a great asset to both the research community, but also the policy development. So we will move over to our panel discussion, and I would like to introduce you to our panel. So first we have Ephraim Akili Mali. He's a PhD student at the University of Witwatersrand. Yeah. In Johannesburg, and an assistant lecturer at the Department of Economics and Management at Bukavu Official University in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have Stefano Musoya from the National Networks of Farmers Groups in Tanzania. We have Selina Butali, a regional gender, children's and youth advisor in Kenya from Via Agroforestry. We have Elizabeth Gulugulu. She's from the organization African Youth Initiative on Climate Change in Zimbabwe. And she's also currently the Global South focal point for the official Children's and Youth Constituency of the UNFCCC, as well as also a member of the Youth Task Force that was mentioned by Anna earlier, the Youth Task Force of the Stockholm plus 50. That was a lot of names and a lot of words, but just to be efficient, we would like our panelists to give a brief presentation of themselves. So Ephraim, would you like to go first in introducing yourself?
Yes, Matilda. Good afternoon, dear members. Can you please listen to me?
Yeah, we hear you fine.
Yeah, thank you so much. So actually you already introduced me, Matilda, thank you. So I'm Akilimalin Datawa Ephraim. I'm an assistant lecturer at University Officiel de Bukavu. I live in Congo. But right now I'm doing my PhD at University of Wits, Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. So I have an interest in youth, especially in youth agribusiness. I have been working with IITA, which is the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, as a consultant. And I also worked with IFAD, which is the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And together we have really conducted research on youth agribusiness and how best we can engage youth in both agroforestry and agribusiness. And right now I'm working with the Agripreneurship Alliance, and together we are trying to train youth on how they can develop business idea in the agribusiness value chain. And then we try to support those who are most promising by giving them funds so that they can go and implement their business ideas. So right now we are in our second cohort of training, and we already have some youth who are doing some businesses out there. Thank you so much.
Very nice to hear. So a very good example of transferring funds to youth. Excellent. Stefano, would you like to go next?
Yes. Hello, my name is Stefano Msuya. I work at a network of farmers, smallholder farmers in the Kilimanjaro region, Tanzania, Mviwaki. And professionally, I have a bachelor degree in project planning and management from the University of Tanzania. And I have been working in the agriculture sector since 2015 after graduating from the university. And I have been working with other several organizations, especially in human rights education projects, and also in some evaluation activities. Yes, and I currently live here in Kilimanjaro region, which is the region where the highest mountain in Africa is available or is found. So it's also opportunity for us who wish to have a tourist activity here in Tanzania. I welcome him or her in Kilimanjaro region. And also I have been working with youth through participating in several youth leadership programs like a Young African Leaders Initiative yearly in Nairobi. And I stayed there for 1 month and a half. I also participated in WeFect programs through Mviwaki because WeFect is the main donor in our organization. And also I have been participating in several programs, including Leadership for Change program, which is held in Nairobi. Also, I have been participated in several events from CIAN in Nairobi, also online through several causes. Okay, we also getting materials, agroforestry materials from VI Agroforestry through their online platform. So here at Mviwaki, we work with farmers groups and pastoral groups, including women groups and youth groups. But you may find the youth are very few in terms of grouping, because there are several as shared by Alice and Jonathan. Those key findings are very useful to this context, because youth are characterized or have several needs, which actually the policy issues or policy makers, they don't actually implement well in this area of youth. Yes, that's a short brief of who I am.
Very nice. Thank you, Stefano. Selina, can you go next, please?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Selina Butali. I work for Agroforestry Eastern Africa. I'm the Regional Gender, Children and Youth Advisor. And we work in 4 countries in the region. And youth are a very important group in our programming. And we've been very intentional in the engagement of youth, either in leadership, in livelihood improvement, and also in policy processes so that they are able to move beyond being bystanders of processes, that they can be fully engaged. So engaging them through, first of all, acknowledging that social structures really limit their participation. And the policy brief is quite timely because it brings up the issues that we've been battling with for a very long time. Recognizing also youth's ability to be able to connect with market players, with different industry players, services, ideas, information has been also something that's been worrying. And also about the agency, whom do they engage at all levels? How do they engage? Do they have the ability to do that? Those are all things that we see opportunities in if we're going to be able to advance young people in agroforestry. And more so also, we resonate a lot with the plight of young women amongst this demographic, which they are marginalized in a different way. And I hope that through these discussions and the launch of this brief, it will be able to unpack different ways that we can be able to better engage young people, because the opportunities exist and they are willing and ready to take up the challenge, but they just need someone to be able to stop for a minute and listen to what the young people are saying. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Selena. I totally agree. That was really well captured. Elizabeth, would you like to go next?
Thank you so much for the platform to speak, and thank you to the organizers of the event for coming up with this beautiful event whereby young people are given the platform to share their findings. Thank you so much to Alice and Jonathan for such a beautiful presentation. My name is Elizabeth Gulugulu Machache. I'm based in Zimbabwe. I am a member of the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force, and since it's a diverse group of young people from all over the world doing different things, I'm also the current Global South focal point for the Children and Youth constituency of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So before I was focal point, I was the contact point for the Agriculture Working Group, whereby we engage young people in agriculture-related policies, also putting into consideration that agriculture is also contributing much to greenhouse gas emissions. We have written so many policies which feed directly into the climate change negotiations, and we've been working so much on the Coronivia Joint Work on Agriculture, whereby we advocate for climate smart agriculture. And I'm glad this discussion is on agroforestry, which is also a component under climate smart agriculture, and also agroecological practices. I think I would also want to say that also through my organization from Zimbabwe last year, we also compiled our policy brief, which was also focusing on agriculture, forest, and other land use. And it also mainstreamed some of the issues that have been highlighted today by our wonderful young people. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So really nice to have you all here. We heard about the potential, some potentials and some barriers presented in the brief, and you have also brought it up in your presentation. And I think it was really good because you brought up a few good examples of how youth have been involved in planning and development for agricultural policy, and also for how your organizations can support youth. I was wondering if you could give some positive examples of where we have seen a successful involvement of youth, where governments and policy development have taken steps to involve youth, both maybe on a national level or an international level. Ephraim, do you have any such good examples?
Thank you, Matilda. Yes, I do. I will just give the example of the the Democratic Republic of Congo. What has been going on actually with RITA is that they are really trying to involve youth into agribusiness, into agroforestry. But again, the other example I can give is IFAD, because the International Fund for Agricultural Development has really designed a program to conduct research on youth agribusiness disability and how best we can engage youth into agribusiness. So some youth has been selected in Africa to conduct that research, and they have been selected 3 times, and for which time they were selected 30, and I am one of those who were selected. And we really conduct research, so to understand what are the barriers, what are the fears, what are the expectations of youth vis-a-vis agribusiness and agroforestry. But again, it's a good example, yes, because this is like awareness, it's like awakening. But on another point, I found that there is something a bit wrong, because yes, we conduct research, but after we have conducted research, we don't really move forward to implement any policy that can have an immediate impact on these youth who have been giving us data and who have been responding to our questions. So yeah, so it's both positive. On another note, it's also negative. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and that's a general problem, of course, how to communicate research to policy development. I think most researchers has a problem with that, but this must be a very pressing issue, of course. Selina, do you have any thoughts on good examples where youth have been involved in policy development when it comes to agriculture or forestry?
Maybe not quite, but I could probably give an example of our project in Uganda, the Green Livelihood Improvement Program, which is youth-centered, being run by the youth for the youth. And through the partner in Uganda, one of the key elements of that project is engagement of young people in policy processes and dialogues, where maybe not at international level, at global level, but even from the local levels, from the district, how to mobilize young people, form platforms for engagement, and identifying an issue and working with young people through the process to know how to engage, what skills they need for dialogue, and escalating it to higher levels and being incorporated into policies. The project is just about 2 years old. Unfortunately, it started during the time when we've had COVID-19. We are yet to see much more, but that was set up with a good intention of just creating that platform for engagement where young people can have the opportunity to be able to do that with a partner who has the expertise in doing that and has done that successfully before.
Very good. Thank you very much. I realized that if we're going to have time to move through some of the question, at least we have to move forward. I wanted to ask Stefano. Jonathan and Alice brought up those 3 main barriers to engaging in agroforestry. It was funds, financial barriers. It was land rights barriers, and also knowledge. Do you have any good ideas or examples on how to address those barriers?
Okay. As I said earlier, those are the 3 main barriers to youth to engage in agroforestry. And in order to addressing them, firstly, we should advocate for youth to take leadership in agroforestry, especially in the plans and the programs, because we have been seeing even here in Tanzania when they were developing Tanzania National Agriculture Policy, youth were minimal involved from the planning, but also during the implementation of those plans, youth were not actually involved in the implementation stage. So it means that the program or the policy is there, but youth still, they don't have leadership in those policies or programs. Also, we are. I would like to address. We can address the issue of youth by strengthening financial inclusion mechanisms and promote land rights to youth in agroforestry actions, because financially youth are constrained to engage in agroforestry. So we are working to engage youth through promoting them to engage into groups. They can be in groups, or they can have some small associations where they can lend and use money for agriculture, agroforestry, and agriculture in general. And also, the banks or financial institutions should consider youth when it comes to the issue of financing. Here we are working with several community banks which are trying to tackle the issue of financing in agriculture to youth. So we are working with several community banks like Uchumi Commercial Bank, which also is part of the partner organization or partner in Tanzania through WeFECT programs. We also we can address also the issue of barriers to youth on agroforestry by supporting the establishment and also strengthening the existing youth-led organizations and company, because we have been seeing even this time of COVID-19, most of the youth companies and organizations were totally closed because youth have no power into policy implementation. So the organizations had no, they didn't have a stand or foundation where these organizations or this company can go and cry for help. So that is also another concern where we can also consider to make sure that the issue of agroforestry which are facing youth are tackled. So we can focus on those, on several issues or solutions, but few, as I explained, those are the, I can see in my side that those are the solutions which we can do for now.
Very good. Thank you very much. I was thinking about the engagement in the agroforestry policy, where you said that there was a lack of youth engagement. I would assume that that was a lack of leadership from the governmental structures and not from the youth interest in taking part. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. I think it can work because here in Africa or in Tanzania specifically, youth are not given decision-making position. They just given those political areas where these elder people are using youth as their leader for their political gains. So in terms of decision-making, youth are totally not recognized or not given position to make decision for their opportunities and also for their interest. So what you're talking is actually, I agree with it.
Very good. I was wondering, Elizabeth, because you're a really good example of youth engaging in policy development. I was thinking some of the engagements you are doing is on a very global level. Do you have any ideas of how to get youth more involved in more national or local policy development?
Thank you so much for that question. Yes, I think most of the times we say young people are not interested, young people do not like doing this, but I think we have taken a step further to ask, why are young people not interested? And what we have found out is there is a huge capacity gap that is there. How can you contribute to something that you don't know? How can you contribute to something that you cannot articulate well? And who is at fault here when we say there's a huge there's a huge gap that is there. I mean, most of the times it's the responsibility of the NGOs, it's the responsibility of the government themselves to make sure that young people are capacitated and they can be able to articulate and contribute to this discussion. If the government of any country today says they are opening up and they are accepting policy recommendations for maybe, let's say it could be climate smart agriculture, you'll see young people will not be able to participate because they don't even know how to contribute into a policy itself. So I think this is where we should start. Anna mentioned quite well the need for young people to be involved and engaged in these discussions. There is need for co-creation, there is need for co-leadership. So this is where we should start. If it's a government, how are they engaging with their young people? Are they taking time to capacitate young people? Are they taking their time to make sure that young people are on board and they understand these critical issues? So at the end of the day, if young people are not capacitated, you'll find that these policies will just come and will go, and there is no input from any young person, and the document does not even mainstream anything to do with youth participation, how young people can actually contribute into the agricultural sector. And at the end of the day, we have a document that does not even at all accommodate young people, and it's difficult for us to have access to land. It's difficult for us to come up with certain innovations because the policies themselves, they do not support the participation and the engagement of young people. So this is where it all starts. It all has to start with, taking a step further when we're talking about youth engagement. We need to go a step further to check, are our youth capacitated enough? What do they need? Let's do a needs-based assessment. We cannot say young people, they are not interested in policy, but at the same time, we are also not playing our role as government officials and as NGOs officials. So I think this is the gap that is really there, especially in different countries, most of the countries. From a global perspective, of course, you will find that, of course, we can have, representative from regions, but it's not enough if, youth from different countries themselves, they do not even know this information. We actually had, to look for resources, and we had quite a number of organizations that supported us last year when we were doing our youth consultations on this policy brief, the NDC's policy brief that I was referring to. There was a specific thematic topic that was talking about agriculture, and we realized that we had to go a step further to start capacitating youth on how the importance of having their voices to be included in policy documents, especially in the agricultural space. It worked from our end, and right now we are now looking for resources to make sure that whatever we contributed into that policy brief, at least our young people will be able to implement it. Could it be regenerative agriculture, agroforest initiative, climate smart agriculture initiative? So yeah, I think this is all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. It makes me recall the discussion we have with the CBD negotiators, and they said, I asked them so what is your support to the youth organization? And they said, the youth organizations, they don't need any support because they are fully funded. And I was thinking, well, maybe funds are not the only way you can support a youth organization. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time, but really good point, Elizabeth. I will keep thinking about that. I wanted to ask one other reflection. I mean, I fully agree with what you said, Elizabeth, because we are in an old people design of development organizations and policy development. And most of the people engaged in policy development are old. So how can we use youth-specific capacities to push the development further? Because I know there's so much energy and so much knowledge and so much innovation among youth that we as old people might not even realize. Do we have any examples of that? The floor is open if we have any thoughts on how to capture that youth-specific capacities. Or it might be a difficult question to answer.
Yes, Matilda.
Great.
Yes, so I'm not sure it's difficult. Yes, it can be a bit tricky. But what I'm seeing from my experience is that if you train youth, and if you try to support them in terms of helping them work in group, they really come up with amazing ideas. Not only amazing ideas, but they also change their attitude towards agriculture. So one way we can achieve what you are saying there is to train youth, not only train them, but also work within teams. So if they work within teams, they really develop ideas. And of course, we need to expose them to some successful stories of people who have done great things in the agricultural value chain. Yeah, so it can be one way, yeah, to create this interest among youth, because definitely what I see is that in most of the cases, youth do not think about agribusiness, agriculture, agroforestry. When you try to talk to them, to show them the opportunities that agroforestry offers, you really find that they get excited and yeah, they get interest in agroforestry. Yeah.
Very good, thank you. Does anybody else in the panel want to comment? If not, I would like to, oh, sorry, Selina.
Thanks, Matilda. I think if I get your question right, it's about engagement in policy processes, where could be the starting point. What I'd like to say is that no policy process exists in a vacuum. There is always a process to it, and the problem is where the event is happening or the process is happening vis-a-vis where the young people are, mostly down in the rural areas, without any knowledge of what is happening. Most of these policies would probably have a review, a first hearing, a second hearing. No young person in the village might know what that entails, who to involve in that, you know, where it's happening, what does it cost you to get there, to be able to have your views and your interests aired into that. So I think it also starts also with being aware of what is happening, but it cannot just happen in one day. They need to be exposed to what this is. They need to be made aware of what's happening. If there's going to be a review of, for instance, an agriculture policy, it needs to be quite transparent that this is happening during this time, and young people's views are welcome between this time and this time, down to the local levels, that the process is very inclusive, that it's bottom up, that all their views are collected from there and fed into the main document. That is lacking, and it's not because that doesn't happen, but it's because when the policymakers are out there, if they want a policy that interests them, they will make that happen. When it comes to electioneering policies, they will make their interests put in there, and they will bring young people on board and even make them endorse that. But why can't these duty bearers be held accountable? Why can't they be made to know that young people are demanding that they are part and parcel of the processes that will ultimately affect their lives, not only now, but in the future?
So true. Very nice, Selina. Stefano, do you have a comment?
Yes, I have very short comment as to in order to capture the whole system or the whole spectra. We, as I can say, as a development actors, first of all, I would like to congratulate you, because forums like this are the key point of view to take so that we can push this agenda, because we need these forums so that our voices can be heard internally and externally, because without these voices, nothing will happen. So they have to know that in today we had several dialogues, or we have analyzed or assessed several program or policy which is related to youth, and we have identified 1, 2, 3 as the key point to take. So we can engage several policymakers, politicians, academicians, and all people who are involved in whole value chain in agriculture. We need this voice, either regionally, internationally, or nationally, even locally. We need this voice to be heard, because I have the example. Nowadays, technology is powerful. Here in Tanzania, we had an increase in the cost of network charges, I mean bundles. But through the social networks, youth raised their voices and they said, no, this is too much. You have to reduce. It took only 4 days. The government reduced those cost of bundles. So that is the example. If we will push the issue of agroforest, the issue of agriculture, the issue of police to those who are the key actors, I'm very sure that we will achieve this movement for young people. That's very short.
That was a really great example of how to use these youth-specific capacities. I mean, I'm not saying that social media is a youth-specific capacity, but they are driving the development. We cannot look away from that. A really, really short comment, Ephraim, because now we're reaching 1 o'clock and we need to finish.
Yes, Matilda. So actually, I want to say that we also need to connect interventions, because we really need to know who is doing what and how all the intervention can come together if possible, because I find that everyone is doing what he wants and everyone is ignoring what the other is doing. So we should connect interventions.
Very nice. Okay, Anna, I hope you got some questions asked, some questions answered. And since the time is really flying, I would suggest that we in the panel group sit down and talk about the remaining questions and maybe write something up that we can share with the participants at a later stage. But that's just an idea. I need to conclude this webinar. I know that it's 1 minute past 1. I'm just going to make a short conclusion. If you want to stay for that, please. And if you need to run, I thank you so much for being here. So thank you very much, Elizabeth, Ephraim, Stefano, and Selina. Your experience in the field of youth and agriculture are truly extensive, and your contribution to the brief and this discussion is highly appreciated. I want to bring a few conclusions forward and hope that we all can play a part in driving this issue of youth involvement, both in the near future, but also in the long perspective. So while agroforestry is an agricultural method as old as man, we all know that traditional knowledge and practices is not getting the recognition it deserves, especially in times of great environmental and socioeconomic stress. And sometimes it's ignored and sometimes it's straight out banned. And we need to remember here that we here see knowledge, practical experiences, and a long-standing tradition of practicing agroforestry. And we have seen examples of that here today. And finally, we need to see those practices reach into the core of policymaking. And last week, the IPCC released its 6th assessment report on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. You might have seen that. And agroforestry and other agroecological practices featured as one example of effective adaptation options. We can also see that the efforts of youth and youth groups are being recognized all over the world and taken into account. This is where Stockholm Plus 50 is a really good example, but we could also see that in the IPCC report, for example. It was featured many times. However, good examples like the IPCC and Stockholm Plus 50 and so on is not enough, sadly. And we need to continue to strive for an inclusive policy development process with good examples like you have told us here today, our dear panel, where civil society, youth and other marginalized groups are given the platform they need and deserve. And that will for sure benefit us all. I would also like to thank all the organizations in the Agroforestry Network for the hard work you are doing in bringing knowledge and highlighting the importance of agroforestry in today's climate, no pun intended. Thank you so much for joining us today. The brief is finally out in the world and can be downloaded from Agroforestry Network's webpage. You can find the link in the chat. Please help us spread the brief and the insights we have learned today. And don't hesitate to contact us for any further questions. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.